Welcome again, everybody. Thanks so much for coming out today to the third in the Edible Education at Home online training series. Today's session is all about instructional strategies for edible education at home. And the first two sessions that we had on distance learning and curriculum design and cross-curricular connections were really all about what to teach in teaching for distance learning. And today marks the shift in looking at how to teach. So today we're really going to dig in on instructional strategies for distance learning for edible education. But to actually get us started, we're going to dig right in with an activity led by Wendy Johnson, a master gardener, author, and Zen Buddhist, who will lead us in an activity. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it over to Wendy Johnson.
Well, good afternoon. What a pleasure to be with you this afternoon and to continue our investigation of beginning and learning from in the real world. Our first session began with tasting a strawberry. Our next session, or second session, continued the in-depth, both sensual and gustory appreciation of the strawberry. And today it occurred to me, let's look at what happens when we hold a strawberry in our hand and go back in time to 22,000 years ago, when the first remains of the strawberry, which is a rose fruit, a charter member of the great rose family, my teacher Alan Chadwick, said the strawberry, its name is not because of a straw taste, but because it strays. So the great strayberry of antiquity, 22,000 years old, their cultural records of this ancient rose fruit, fossilized roses from the Miocene era, which is as long ago as 60 to 1 million years ago. So this long, deep history of the rose is part of our life and our experience as learners and eaters and enjoyers. So I thought, let's go back in time and let's really consider what is the mystery of this fruit. You know, our experience of working in the garden with young people has been quite profound, and especially when we go down to the most basic question, what do you notice when you hold a strawberry? What do you notice when you hold up this ancient member of the rose family in your hand? Of course, we've experienced the deep and delicious smell and the feel and the taste, but also there's the question of what do you notice and what does it make you wonder and what does it remind you of? So I wanted us to think a little bit about the cultural history of this plant because horticulture is all about the love and the cultural experience, the wheel of life that runs through the garden and through the kitchen and through the minds and hearts and brains of young learners. So again, we are looking at a charter member of the ancient rose family, and most of the fruit we eat and love and treasure is in this great family: the apple, the pear, plum, cherry, medlar, quince, loquat, almond, peach, apricot, strawberry, blackberry, and raspberry. Then if we go in a little closer to how is this plant actually a rose, and what do you notice? What is the characteristic of the rose family? The 5 petals, the beautiful 3 leaves of the ancient rose, and that runs throughout the family. So here are the leaves of a strawberry. I hope you can see this. And here is the large pendular fruit of a modern strawberry. But actually the ancestral strawberry is a much wilder creation, a tiny little woodland creature creeping through the forest. So Fragaria vesca, the ancient strawberry, is a woodland creation and tiny and fragrant, and it's been used as medicine or enjoyed as medicine for generations and generations. It has been used both as a laxative and astringent, as a cleanser, and also as a way to cleanse dysentery. So the ancient original fruit, this tiny one, is the source of this modern monstrosity of deliciousness. So again, if you're lucky enough this afternoon to be holding an actual living strawberry, take a peek at it and focus in. Nick, I don't know if we have a way we can have a close-up screenshot of the actual fruit of the strawberry, because if people aren't holding it, it is a miracle to actually notice how the fruit is formed. And so the strawberry is not a classic berry. It's different from a classic berry. A classic berry is a fleshy fruit that has a single seed inside. So a classic berry would be like a raspberry or a beautiful blackberry. Strawberry is different from all of these. So if you look closely at the fruit itself, what's unusual about it is the outer surface of the large strawberry. You can see these tiny little raised dots. These are called achenes or achenes. And these little tiny dots are actually the fruit of the strawberry. We mistakenly think that these little tiny dots on the outside of the fruit, and this is a fruit bold enough to be dressed in red, full of flesh and juice and sweetness, and covered with its own fruit. So the actual fruit is the tiny little dot on the surface of the strawberry. And if you were to bisect or to cut vertically, to cut right through the strawberry, then you can see right away that the flower itself is growing and producing its fleshiness from an internal receptacle. So if you have a strawberry, go ahead and cut it in half. And my experience is young people thrill to this. And sometimes I'll take a little piece of white paper and press the strawberry on the white paper, kind of kiss the strawberry down on the white paper. And students also love to have the strawberry go all around them so they have an imprint. And if you cut the strawberry in half, you can clearly see that those little tiny dots or achenes are connected to the internal receptacle of the fruit. I wonder how the heck that happens. It makes me think of wires going into the heart of softness and sweetness. So this is a natural way to be filled with wonder. And the actual female parts of the strawberry that give rise to the outer fruit are embedded in the receptacle, which is the swollen stem tissue. And we call that the fruit. But the true fruit, those little ones on the outside or on the surface of the fruit, each develops and produces a growth regulating hormone or compound that gives rise and impulse. You can see those tiny little traces from the outside fruit leading into the inner receptacle in the fruit. Those tiny little trace lines give an impulse to the internal fruit to grow, be sweet, and develop your fullness. So a little bit of free form teaching about what actually happens. But I don't want to turn away from the fact that as much pleasure and delight as we receive from this ancient rose fruit, it's also a fruit of tremendous suffering. Most strawberries grown for this country, for North America, grown in California. And it is a fruit of the most sprayed and environmentally endangered fruit that we know. So I really appreciate the work of the Edible Schoolyard in collecting the experiences of the good growers who are turning away from using pesticides, realizing that some of the same age children that we're privileged to work with in schools and in the extended community are also children that are in the fields, in the methyl bromide sprayed fields of the strawberry, harvesting this fruit of mixed blessing. Think of the little tiny wild strawberry as we come to a close and begin to break into small groups. Think of the tiny little strawberry that gives rise to the huge commercial strawberry of today. In order to get this large, a lot of breeding has had to happen, and it's unnatural in many ways. The ancient fruit rambled and rolled through the woodland area, whereas the modern fruit is meant to be grown and actually encouraged to be grown, or we could say forced to be grown in strawberry fields forever that are sometimes more than we like to acknowledge and notice, sprayed and endangered fields, endangered farmland. So with this taste of sweetness, may we make the deep commitment to be sure that every child that we contact and come into connection with has the opportunity to eat clean fruit, to taste the sweetness of the ancient rose family, and to be protected and acknowledged and not abused in any way. So again, thinking a little bit, thank you very much for letting me begin this afternoon's teaching by ruminating and remembering and appreciating the strawberry, but also not turning away from the fact that we have a lot of work to do, and elemental environmental justice is as much on the plate these days as this beautiful ancient treasure of antiquity. So thank you very much. I do want to say that in the, I know from being privileged to work with the extended Native American community that although we say that there are ancient practices of recognizing the strawberry, since the beginning of time, Native people like to remember and remind us that there's always been a strawberry festival. The first taste of spring is saved for the tiny little wild strawberry that in many Native cultures opens the palate and the mind to the beginning of the growing season. So the ancient strawberry festival, may we be connected in every way to the sweetness and pungency of this truth. So again, thank you for this afternoon. Thank you very much. Back to Nick.
Thank you, Wendy.
Yeah.
Thank you. So we're going to go straight from that to letting you share some of your experiences with strawberries, some of your memories with strawberries. And we're going to go to a breakout session now. And in that breakout session, you'll be with 3 other people. And take the first minute as a group to do some introductions, share your name, your location, the role or title, but don't go into your whole program description. And then each take a turn sharing a memory of eating strawberries. This could be anything. Maybe it's a time you ate one that you picked directly from a plant. Maybe it's a favorite dish from your childhood that's made using strawberries. Or maybe it's somebody who you associate eating strawberries with in your family, or a friend or a community member. But just think to yourself for a second right now, what's a top of the mind when I think of strawberries? What comes to me as a strawberry memory that you'd be willing to share with a couple of people in your breakout group? And we're going to go ahead and launch those breakout groups. But before we do, we're going to put this slide in the chat. So if you get to the breakout group and don't remember what to talk about, you can have this slide. But I think you'll all know exactly what to talk about after listening to Wendy talk about strawberries so beautifully and sharing so much history. And of course, I imagine you all have your own rich histories with strawberries. So let's go ahead and get into the breakout groups, and we'll see you back here in the main room in about 6 minutes. Okay, and it looks like we have most everybody back from their breakouts now. I hope you all got to share some wonderful, exciting stories about strawberries. So we're going to dive into our session agenda now, and you can see we're almost halfway through our hour already, just with those opening activities, and we're just going to start our presentation on instructional strategies for edible education at home now. But as you can imagine, we've also already done some of those instructional strategies. After a short presentation, we're going to do a Padlet activity where you'll be able to share some of your favorite instructional strategies. And then we'll wrap up right around 2 o'clock, but we will have an optional half-hour discussion following. So if you'd like to stick around from 2 to 2:30, we'll actually organize breakout groups by grade level. So you'll have the opportunity to work with a group of educators who teach a similar grade level to you and talk about instructional strategies, lesson plans, and anything else that you might want to talk about. So again, that will be from 2 to 2:30, and you'll just stay in this room after 2 when we close. I'm Nick Lee. I'm a senior program manager with the Edible Schoolyard, and I'm in my 8th year here with the program. And I'm also joined by Raquel Vigil, who's our curriculum specialist. She'll be supporting a bit in this training.
Awesome. Hi, everyone. It's wonderful to be with you. I love instructional strategies. I feel like I'm a deep curriculum design nerd, so happy to be here and share with you all and learn from you all as well. Thank you.
I was really lucky to have Raquel supporting me last year as I designed a new curriculum, helping me decide on my instructional strategies for my class. And so I feel lucky to pass some of these on to you today. Norms and guidelines for the session, just please keep the mute setting on during the presentation. This is being recorded and will be made available following the workshop. And if you have any technical difficulties, go ahead and chat those over to Russell, who's doing the tech for us today, and he's in the chat as Edible Schoolyard host. You can post any questions to him as well in the chat, and we'll get to those at the end of the session if we have a little bit of extra time. So our essential questions for the day are listed right up here, and I'm going to say what our goals are for the session, which are kind of matched up to these essential questions. So our goals for the session are that you'll leave today with a greater understanding of instructional strategies, what they are, how they work, why you would want to use them. Our goal for today is that you'll leave with a better understanding of what instructional strategies work well for distance learning for edible education, and also with a bit of introspection and reflection on what instructional strategies fit your own teaching style and your own approach, as well as that of your students and the communities that you serve. I want to do a quick review from our first workshop in the series, where we talked a lot about distance learning. And our top takeaways from that were to scale down for success, think student-centered, plan around access issues, to work collaboratively, and to work iteratively. This workshop is available online on our website, on our training page. You can watch the whole webinar there. Similarly, 2 weeks ago, we had a workshop on cross-curricular design, so connecting edible education to other core academic subjects. And in that, we talked about how food is just an engaging subject and a great way to create student buy-in to enrich academic learning, and that cooking and gardening can be used to teach any subject, and that cross-curricular learning helps students make sense of the world and find meaning in what they're learning in school by connecting it to other subjects. So with that, we'll tuck into instructional strategies. And really, instructional strategies are just ways to support student engagement. They're tools to help you organize your time and your focus, as well as the time and focus of the students that you work with. Instructional strategies are key for creating successful lessons, and they also are all typically based in kind of the arc of a lesson. So when creating a lesson plan, I'm always thinking about what's the beginning, what's the middle, what's the end, and what is the opening activity going to be? What is the instructional strategy hook going to be for that lesson? What's the instructional strategy for the body, the main content of that lesson, or the main activity for that lesson? And then finally, what's the closer? What's going to be that little formative assessment? What's going to be that little thing that we do at the end that lets me know as a teacher if the students got the content or the main part of the body of the lesson? So as we're looking at these different instructional strategies, you can think to yourself for each one as we're talking about it, does that work as an opening? Does that work for teaching the main body of a lesson? And does that work for closing? And we'll do an activity later on where you'll actually be thinking about what is the opening instructional strategy, what's a body instructional strategy, and what's a closing instructional strategy. So as you may have guessed, we didn't do all those things at the beginning just for fun. That was actually demonstrating a couple of instructional strategies that are some of our favorites. So we started with Wendy Johnson telling a rich story about the history of the strawberry. And storytelling is one of our favorite instructional strategies here. I think it's such a rich and engaging way to share deep content, to share a lot of information in a way that just feels captivating. We have a little chat between me and my coworkers who are running the tech and supporting on this training, and they were commenting in that as Wendy was leading that, saying, I could listen to this for days. Like, why isn't this just an hour long? And that's often how students feel as we tell stories. That's also an example of activity before content. So instead of diving in with the session agenda and giving you this presentation first, we dove right into a story. We dove right into something. And that flipping that structure using a instructional strategy that is really engaging at the very beginning is a great practice. The next one of food memories was all about activating prior knowledge and experience and affective learning. So that's in recognition that learning is an emotional process as well, and that all of our students are coming with their own bodies of knowledge and experience. And when we bring those into the classroom, we invite them in, we recognize those, and they show up more fully because we're inviting them to show up more fully. And then finally, the other one we've already done today is essential questions. And posing essential questions and posing outcomes, the goals and outcomes for a lesson, are really valuable because it brings the students into the process. You're inviting them to understand what it is that we're aiming to learn today and how we're aiming to get there. So I'm a big fan of essential questions and try to always have those in my lessons. So we're going to go through a couple of other instructional strategies that we at the Edible Schoolyard like to use. And these are both instructional strategies that we like to use when we're in the classroom, in the garden and kitchens at King Middle School, which we aren't right now. And also ones that we are using in our new Edible Education at Home online curriculum, which is for educators and students who are doing distance learning who aren't able to be in the physical classrooms together right now. So sensory learning, I think this one is really a basis of our whole pedagogy at the Edible Schoolyard, where we want students to learn by doing and by engaging richly, by touching, by smelling, by having all of these different inputs. And this is one that can feel a lot harder when we're not in a physical space together. But my coworker Raquel put together this lesson on how do we smell. That is a science lesson for sixth graders about understanding olfactory senses. And it uses a YouTube video on the basics, the science of that, and then has students actually go into the kitchen and pull out spices and herbs and smell and engage and write about the emotions and write about their experiences and their memories of that, and then go back and watch that video about the science of smell again. And so engaging the actual sense of smell really richly and drawing in their personal experience while learning about how that's functioning, I think just brings that lesson home. Raquel, do you have something you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think also it's important to think about instructional strategies on the like macro and then micro level, meaning that in a lesson, sort of this particular lesson is really guided by sensory learning. That's the instructional approach, the instructional approach we use. And then the particular strategies also kind of talk about the ways in which and the how in which we're teaching that thing, right? And so to me, it's good to think about that on those different levels, because as Nick sort of talked about in the smell lab, it's sensory, but we also use video. So using videos as an instructional strategy, engaging students in the actual smells is a way to do that. So just it's important to think about instructional strategies and the approaches from kind of those multiple levels and the ways in which it shows up multiple times in your instruction.
Thanks, Raquel. So another one, and this is the one that Wendy was referencing earlier, is the strawberries and labor lesson. And this one uses textual analysis, which is a common instructional strategy. And I think one of the things that we've been working on is considering what can serve as a text. When we're doing textual analysis, what is that text? And in the case of this lesson, the strawberries and labor lesson, the first text that the students engage with is this infographic in front of you. And then they have the option of choosing other texts to engage with. And those texts are more traditional. They are excerpts from newspapers, excerpts from magazines. But remember that videos, podcasts, recipes, and basically any form of media can be a text that students can engage with and analyze. And working with a high school class last year, my students loved Instagram cooking videos. That was like their favorite source of food media. So when we were doing a little unit on reading recipes and kind of recipe analysis and choosing like what recipes to cook and what to like probably skip over, we actually spent a lot of time with those like 30-second, tasty Instagram style videos because they loved them. So choosing text that students are already familiar with or really engage with can be a great way to invite deeper textual analysis. Prompting reflection is another of our favorite instructional strategies at the Edible Schoolyard. And this is something where I personally just think students learn deeply when they have time to reflect, when they get to be introspective, when they are prompted to do that, since that's not always a norm, that's not always a practice for every student. So in this Reflecting on Food series, a mini series of audio prompts, we ask students to think about their own relationship to food. And we do this by asking open-ended questions in kind of a slow pace in these audio prompts that just creates space and time for those students to think about those questions themselves. So again, prompting reflection, asking open-ended questions is one of our favorite instructional strategies here at the Edible Schoolyard. A KWL chart, this is one that's probably familiar to a lot of you, but it's another one of our favorites. And that's a what I know, what I want to know, and what I learned chart. And so this is a common opener / closer activity where it's used both at the beginning and at the end of a lesson. And so students start by bringing in that prior knowledge. And then it asks them to think about what they want to know. And this is a big one that I believe in a lot as well, is sparking that intrinsic motivation, helping students dig and find their own curiosity. You heard Wendy at the beginning of the session talk about the I notice, I wonder, it reminds me of. That's another frame that we use a lot in our garden classes, where we have students, when they're making an observation, connect it to other things that they know, and also pose questions, lean into curiosity. And once we have that curiosity on the table, there's a lot more energy and enthusiasm for learning. And finally, these KWL charts also serve as a way to monitor progress, to actually know what students are taking away from the lesson. So if at the end of this lesson, a student's filling out this KWL chart, and in the what I learned, they say, you know, there's multiple types of flour because different amounts of the bran are removed, I'm knowing that they got the main point of that lesson. If they leave that what I learned blank, I'm knowing that they probably missed that and that I probably need to revise that lesson plan. So these are a great way to have a small assessment built into your closing instructional strategy. So a lot of these instructional strategies have got to be familiar to you, and there's a lot more that you all know that I have not named here. So we're going to move to a Padlet in just a second. And a Padlet is a form of an online notepad. And on that notepad, you all are going to share what instructional strategies you use in the kitchen, garden, and classroom, what instructional strategies you've seen that have been adapted to distance learning that have worked really well, and also how you plan to adapt your favorite instructional strategies to distance learning. There's also a space to add questions. So I'm going to show you the Padlet now, and then Russell will chat out the link to the Padlet, and you'll be able to use that. But this is the view that you'll have on the Padlet. And to add something, you'll just click the plus and then write in your answer. And as we get all 86 people in the room on this Padlet, it's going to start to fill up with a lot of comments, a lot of rich answers. And so I encourage you to keep that tab open and look back to it later in the session or after the session and use it as a resource where people are talking about what instructional strategies they've seen that have worked well for distance learning. And what we're going to do next is actually go into a breakout session where you can discuss some of those ideas and some of the other instructional strategies that we've talked about. And we've got a little problem-based learning scenario for you and your breakout group, and you're going to be with the same group as you were earlier. Your task is to consider which instructional strategies you could use for a hypothetical lesson where you're teaching on one of two objectives. And those two objectives are students will be able to define organic and compare organic to conventional agriculture, or students will be able to summarize the environmental benefits of organic agriculture. With your breakout group, you can decide what age group you're designing for. I know that will influence a lot of the instructional strategy choices that you make. And just remember, you can look back to the Padlet and consider how you might use some of the different strategies that are listed there. As you're doing this, think about what strategies you might want to use as an opening, what strategies you might want to use as a closing, as well as for the body of your lesson. I hope everybody had a good breakout session and got to discuss some of those strategies. instructional strategies and what you might use if you were teaching that lesson on organic. So, of course, this is all very different right now with everything moving to distance learning in a lot of school districts. And I know that's not true for every district. But just to address instructional strategies for distance learning, many classroom instructional strategies do adapt neatly to distance learning. Some will be harder than others, and that's something that's worth thinking about is as you have your favorite instructional strategies for your home classroom, they may not always shift neatly and easily to distance learning. It can be helpful to imagine that you're a first-year teacher again, as many of us are feeling like first-year teachers as we are designing for a completely new way of teaching. And with that, I would recommend choosing just a few instructional strategies to focus on. If you're trying to do this, that, and the other thing every day with your students, it can be really overwhelming for you and for them. One of the things that I remember is that when you're teaching a new instructional strategy, when you're using a new format, the first time or the first couple times that you're teaching with that format, you're really teaching the format instead of the content. So think about that, and every time you try a new instructional strategy, have patience with it. Have patience with your students as you're trying that new instructional strategy. And it will take some time to find the ones that work well for you, for your students, and for distance learning. So we are coming up right to 2 o'clock now. Russell is going to send a link sheet out in the chat, which will give you all links to every lesson that we've discussed in this workshop. All of those Edible Education at Home lessons are online, downloadable. You can use them with your students, with your schools. I do want to give a quick plug. On August 11th, we'll have one more in this Edible Education at Home summer series of trainings on strategies for blending virtual and real life learning. So talking about virtual field trips, talking about providing kits for students to use at home, those ways of supporting them to do hands-on activities at home through online engagement. The lottery entrance for that training is open now, and as with all the others in this series, it will be recorded and made available to everyone, even those who are not drawn in the lottery. A quick thanks to the Leslie Family Foundation, the Jaffe Family Foundation, the Simon Strauss Foundation, and the Whole Kids Foundation for their generous support of this training series.